Now, look, this is probably the most, I'd say, in-demand section that everyone's asked me to probably make a video on. And what it is what are the top markets and why? Now, look, the way I want to probably go to this is I'll give you a little bit of history as to what's basically happened and why basically we've eventuated to these markets being the top markets, and then furthermore, why it's going to continue on and into the future. Now, to give everyone an idea, in the 1970s, President Nixon in the States, which is something that we actually follow quite closely, took the dollar off the gold standard. Now, what happened with that is the governments around the world, especially the Western world, continue to just devaluate their currency. Now, and what they basically did was continued printing money and overinflating the economy. Now, the only solution basically that the governments had when any crisis was to occur was to just inflate the debt away and print more money. That's all they've done, and that's all that's going to happen in the future again. Now, there's a few really good examples here. First is your stock market crash of 87. Second's your dot-com bubble. Third's your actual GFC, which was ridiculous, and even more ridiculous has been your recent coronavirus with your inflating of markets, and which has been underpinned really by the amount of cash that's circulated in the economy. So anyway, that's basically what's happened. Now let's just go into a few graphs of how much they've actually inflated things over time. Now, if we'll just wait and see how it goes. Now, here's an example of what's happened since basically 1970. Now, I couldn't find an actual graph well on the Australian market, but if you look to the right here, this is one of the US market, and the Australian one is very closely correlated to that. And I can tell you it looks almost exactly the same as that. I've read the data, and look, the graph almost represents it perfectly. Now, if you look at the bottom of basically the right-hand graph, you will see that where the dollar was taken off the gold standard. Now, you can see almost immediately since World War II there, at the end of it in 1945, obviously there was more money in the economy, and that's simply because governments needed to actually create more money, and simply because of the baby boom and a major population boom. So that's why. But from about 1945 right through to 1970, it was fairly stagnant. But look at what happened since 1970, and look at what's happened in every single crisis basically since 1970, and it's just ridiculous. And if you did that to 2024, it would only pretty much go up the way it's been going since from basically the 90s right through to 2020. Now, on the left-hand side is an actual script, or not script, but it's actual photo of a newspaper in Australia in the 1970s. Now, I actually had a photo from a small chalkboard put up in my actual uncle's 60th birthday. We had in Woody Head, nice spot, by the way. And I wanted to take a photo of that, but I had a bit of personal information that I didn't want to share. So that's why I've used this newspaper here. But anyway, wouldn't mind having coffee and spaghetti for 30 and 15 cents. But that's basically what happens when governments overinflate things. I don't think you could even get probably a spaghetti for under $2 now. So if you look at that, that's more than 10x since then, which is just ridiculous. So, a roast chicken for $1. I'd probably live on that if I could. But anyway, look, furthermore to this, it's not only that, but what underpins a lot of Australia's best suburbs also is Australia's migration, especially the migration of high net worth individuals. Now, we're basically the mecca of it in the world. Now, if you look at this, now this is in 2023 where the most high net worth individuals came. Now, you got to remember, so Australia's only got what, 27 million people now. I think it had 26 million in 2023. So if you compare that, we are literally the mecca for it in the world, probably behind especially the major nations. Per capita, the UAE and probably Singapore are above us. But for your major developed nations, it's definitely Australia's number one. Definitely New Zealand number two with their population as well. And they basically only will go to your key major cities in Australia. So that's your Sydneys and your Melbournes. So, and also Brisbane too, actually, especially with the Olympics coming on and the increase in tech businesses developing there, and actual just the economy there is quite good as well for it. Your Singapore and UAE are just basically city states, so I wouldn't even count them as a major nation. But anyway, that's another reason. Now, furthermore to that, you've actually got holding periods. So what that is the time that the average person takes to sell their home is actually increasing over time. So if you look at the top areas of Australia, if you look, this is just over the last 10 years, between the years of 2010 and 2020, you can see that basically we've gone from, and I'd say an average for our top 3 cities of Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. I'm not counting the ACT because I just don't like the ACT. It's as simple as that. I think it's the worst capital you could have picked in Australia. But anyway, you could see an average of probably, let's say, 8 or so, maybe 8.5 years. Now it's going to an average of well over 11 years. Now, what's happening is even in your better suburbs, that's even higher. So properties are turning over less and less in these areas. And what that's creating is you've got the same demand, if not more, because of the population increase, and everyone want to live in the same area, and you've got less supply. So that creates higher prices, therefore. So yeah, that's a large reason why these sort of cities are performing better, and especially certain pockets in a lot of cities. Now, furthermore to this, look, the backbone of Australia really is real estate. Now, the housing market alone, and I'm talking residential, is worth over $10 trillion. Now, that's just ridiculous because it makes up more than 50% of our entire net wealth. Now, if you add the commercial market onto this as well, you've got $2.2 trillion on top of that as well. Now, if we look at super funds too, they've got trillions of dollars as well, by which a lot of that is actually backed up in real estate too. So the number's actually even higher, but I don't have the exact stat for that. But anyway, that's just a little bit more information there. Now, look, the vast majority of wealth in Australia is stored in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, which represents over 80% of the property wealth. Now, what I mean by this, I'm including the Sydney Basin region. So that's basically from Shell Harbour to Newcastle. So that's basically a lot of the population, and I'm also including basically your Sunshine Coast to the Gold Coast there too. So look, that's about 80% of the property wealth in Australia there. Furthermore, now these are more of the things that people are attracted to. So why has there been a flight to these quality locations? Very simple. Level of income growth and availability of jobs. If there's high income there and there's a lot of jobs, people are going to naturally move there. Very simple. People need money to live. Future growth prosperity is one. Generally states that have, should I say, a very consumer-based economy. Now, especially that's in Sydney and Melbourne. You'll notice that businesses will start up there quite a lot because they need people to buy their services. International demand, particularly businesses. Now, look, in Sydney and Melbourne, they're basically international commodities. So you have businesses stationing their entire Southern Hemisphere headquarters here. You've got companies like Deloitte that have huge offices. You have companies, for example, like BlackRock, for example. Whilst I don't like the company, they still got them there. You've got other companies like Xero. You have companies like Microsoft that have huge offices, Google in Sydney and Melbourne, for example. You've got some are in Brisbane too, don't get me wrong, especially with the Olympics coming on its way. So I'm not excluding it there. Another thing, services, facilities, transport. I've spoken about that before. If you've got some of the best services there, for example, doctors, medical health professionals, you've got really good lawyers, you've got really good architects, you've got good builders, you've got really good transport network. People will move there simply because of the ease of getting around, and just the lifestyle's just better there. Thirdly, primary, secondary, and private school zones. I just explained that earlier, but basically, if you've got the best school zones, wealthy families move there, and the reason they move there is because they want to send their kids to good schools. Also get for them to network with other either future high net worth people or present high net worth people. That's the reason. Now, also, if you've got very highly rated education, tertiary education, so universities there, it comes as a big part of it. Now, for example, you've got places like in Melbourne, you have places in the Yarra Council region, the close to the University of Melbourne. You've got very high demand from internationals. They're simply wanting to send their kids to university there, And you've also got other families that want to send their kids to the local private schools. Then therefore, after that, they can go to uni, which is nearby too. Furthermore, an exceptional lifestyle. So if you're close to really good lifestyle precincts, exceptional beaches, exceptional waterways, exceptional, should I say, bars, restaurants, facilities, that plays a big part too. So, for example, people that live in Paddington in Sydney, they have really good, restaurants on Oxford Street in Paddington. They have also the CBD really nearby. So your Opera House, your Harbour Bridge, you've got Bondi Beach close. For people in Brisbane that live somewhere like, should I say, New Farm, you've got, your Fortitude Valley precinct close by. You've got the riverfront there. You've got Howard Smith Wharves very close by too. So all of that has an exceptional lifestyle. So that does play a major part in basically what people look to do. Now, look, I'm going to go into this in greater detail in the future, but basically your top 100 suburbs from the report I'm going off here, and this isn't only this report, you can actually go into CoreLogic, you can get prop value, prop track, you can go to almost any site and you'll find over the last 30 or so, or even more years if you really want to go deeper, you'll find that Melbourne, Sydney are your top performers, and Brisbane's also sprinkled throughout that as well. You have some suburbs of Perth in there too. Now, as you can see in this actual just blurb here, Melbourne actually dominated the highest capital growth suburbs. So Melbourne, of your top 100 suburbs in the Aussie Home Loans 25-year report, actually had 41 entrants, which is incredible. Sydney had 25. Now, without question, let's go to what I know are the prime locations and the best locations to buy in Australia. Now, without question, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane are your top areas to buy in Australia. Now, Sydney, you're talking about areas such as the lower North Shore, very strong capital growth over the long term, very good income demographics over the long term. The eastern suburbs is another one, and the inner west is also another one. So as you could see in probably the demographics map earlier in the video, look, it's just an exceptional area to buy. You've also got the lower end of the northern beaches that has performed exceptionally well, and you'll see this later in this video. In Melbourne, we're talking about the inner city. Now, in the inner city, I particularly mean the Yarra Council region has performed exceptionally well. The inner east, the inner south, and southeast. So we're talking about areas towards Albert Park, out towards Brighton, and areas around Surrey Hills, Box Hill, that kind of area. Old money areas, let's say. And you've got also your inner west of Melbourne. So it's your gentrifying regions, sort of close to Footscray, your Maribyrnong council regions, especially in Hobson's Bay, that kind of way. Some of those councils have performed just exceptionally well as well. For those who have cheaper budgets in mind, an actual area that's performed very well over the long term too, believe it or not, is actually Newcastle and Wollongong perform very well, and also Geelong and Melbourne. So look, you've got, suburbs of, under $1 million, right down to about $450,000 at the moment, that have actually performed literally more than 7% for more than 50 years, and I can trace that back quite well. But either way, let's go to some other locations too. Now, I'm not leaving out all locations in Australia here because that's just a little bit naive, but look, what I will say is there is some other parts of other cities. So look, the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast do have some very good regions. There's about 5 to 8 suburbs in both of them that I'd say are quite good areas to buy. The issue with those areas is the economy just isn't fundamentally backed by your fundamentally strong industries. Like a Gold Coast, for example, is backed a lot by tourism, not by medical, not by finance, banking, or anything like that. Look, Perth as well. Perth, you do have look, Perth, the interesting thing about Perth is it's so specific to the regions that you buy in, and you'll see that later in this video about exactly what I'm talking about there, because you've got quite a lot of land development that's happening in Perth, and it does, whilst it's not a mining town, a lot of the economy is backed by mining, and it does have issues there. So you want to be near areas where there are actually fundamentally strong industries, and I hate to say it, but you want to actually be near where all the jobs are. So that's just the truth of it. Hobart's also got a couple of suburbs now. Hobart's a little bit more of a difficult one to get data on, simply because Hobart, the data, especially from CoreLogic, it hasn't actually been there for as long as some other suburbs, but there is about 8 to 10 suburbs in Hobart that are worth buying, and you can buy right down there to, I'd say, around that $550,000, $600,000 mark, which is still worth buying in. Now, look, we're gonna start with just Sydney. Now, look, I grew up in Sydney. I love Sydney. It's probably my favorite place in the world, despite what a lot of people think about it. Look, Sydney, the biggest reason Sydney has grown so much is the fact that it's just geographically landlocked in every direction. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, you've got the Tasman Sea to the east, the Blue Mountains to the west, you've got the Royal National Park to the south, and Ku-ring-gai Chase to the north. Now, look, basically, in saying that, you've got no more real land to build. That's why there's so many apartments and so many cranes going up in Sydney, like nowhere else, basically, maybe even in the world, apart from probably Dubai. Now, you've only really got sort of your regions towards sort of Schofields and the ponds out towards the Hawkesbury, and kind of out sort of west of Canberra and southwest of Canberra towards Warragamba Dam and the Southern Highlands. Now, look, we're probably only 15 to 20 years away before that's completely built entirely out, especially after that airport's put in. It's just going to exacerbate with this, especially with this population growth, what's going on. It's just going to go crazy. And we're going to have no more land to build on. So you expect to see more apartments, especially with that recent density change by Mr. Chris Minns. Look, now, not only that, look, Sydney's got extremely low unemployment, and it's got also very high paid jobs, and most of these jobs are actually backed by fundamentally strong industries. So you've got large medical precincts in Sydney, you've got law precincts, you've got finance precincts, you've got construction regions, you've got tier 1 contractors almost everywhere. So that's what really backs the Sydney market. Then you've obviously got the real estate market, which I don't think needs any introduction. Not only that too, but Sydney is an international commodity. So you've got very high net worth individuals from nearly everywhere in the world coming to Sydney and wanting to buy in the best suburbs. So that pushes demand up. Probably misconception that not a lot of people don't know is that Sydney's actually got a lot of areas that have a very high base of cash buyers. So a lot of the suburbs, it's the same as Melbourne and Brisbane too. A lot of cash buyers are actually coming in to suburbs that are above $3 million. Not many people come into a suburb with, let's say, $3 or $4 million or above and actually get loans for it. Most of them are actually cash purchases, which is a misconception that a lot of people don't know. Anyway, another thing to do with Sydney is we are full of a lot of NIMBY councils. Now, look, you used to be able to get DAs through in three months or so. Now it's taking on average about 12 months. And not only that, but almost every development group in Australia doesn't. The development group, not only that, but sorry, not development group, but what I mean is more so your actual local doesn't want high-rise apartments in the backyard. And I hate to say, but I somewhat do agree with that. But it's the issue we've got is simply we have too many people. We don't actually promote zoning in the right areas, and then also we don't create enough homes in the areas that people want to live. So if we had lower migration, it'd probably actually help the cause. And we also, if we had better fundamental industry spread out, it'd probably help the cause too. But that's government, and not getting into that. Anyway, let's go into a little bit of the actual further reasons why, and not further reasons, but actually why Sydney where's grown in Sydney. So you can see clearly here, here's your top 20 suburbs in Sydney. Now, look, something to learn here is that some of these suburbs were almost basically just going new estates, or just fundamentally were blocks of land at the time that they were built. So an example of that is somewhere like Wattle Grove. It was very new when it was first built. Sydney is a very complicated market in saying that, because it's geographically unlocked in every direction, you do have suburbs everywhere, but there's definitely an eventuation if you look towards, especially the eastern suburbs like Bronte, Clovelly, and Bondi there, and also if you look towards places like Manly, Freshwater, and Pearl Curl, so the lower end of the northern beaches. Now, if you were to extend this map, you would see a lot of inner west suburbs, a lot of lower north shore suburbs, such as Neutral Bay. Another suburb that you'd see pop up would be Lewisham, Marrickville, suburbs like that. Now it is a little bit distorted, this one for Sydney, but you get the gist of it. And that's the growth that's occurred. So what you're going to see though is there's going to be a fight to quality where there's consistently low supply, and you'll notice as well, not only that too, but the high income demographics will pay more for properties, and especially because just simply the equity sitting in people's pockets. Now, let's go to Melbourne. It's probably, in my opinion, for capital growth alone, your best city in Australia to buy in. Now, the numbers paint a picture of that, and look, I'm going to go into the reasons first of why Melbourne has been the best capital growth market in Australia, and the reason being is because, again, like Sydney, you've got very good employment, very low unemployment rates, you've got high income jobs and very strong industry. So finance is a really big industry in Melbourne. I think 3 of the big 4 banks from memory have their ASX headquarters actually stationed there. And anyway, they're not ASX headquarters, but they're actual company headquarters, should I say. Melbourne's actually got the strongest population growth in Australia of any city, and you've got very strong international demand too, like Sydney too, especially in the really good school zones. Now, Melbourne again is home to very strong NIMBY councils. Places like St Kilda, Stonington's a good example. You get a lot of objection groups there, very hard to build, very hard to subdivide, so you don't have any more stock. You have very wealthy people wanting to buy in these areas, so therefore prices go up. Look, I'll go straight in to the actual numbers behind Melbourne. Now, the numbers, look, what the numbers say is basically you've got a few areas that really continuously show up here. So an area that you can see that shows up a lot is the inner west of Melbourne, particularly in around Maribyrnong. Now, the reason is because it's gentrified a lot. Now, look, previously, areas like Footscray and Yarraville were probably considered the Bronx, especially in the 90s and before that. If you look at the history of places like places where the Western Bulldogs played especially, they were basically the working class man's AFL side in Melbourne. So that's one area. You'll see a lot of suburbs too towards the eastern suburbs and also towards the inner city and Bayside. So McKinnon's one, for example, Ashburn, Box Hill, that's another. They're in sort of southeast eastern suburbs, and Cremorne and Fairfield are in your sort of inner city market. So that's your areas in Melbourne that you would have loved to have bought years ago. As you can see, you could have bought in 1993, right down to, let's say, your $90,000, $100,000 mark quite easily. No problems there. You could probably even bought one of your better properties for your low $100,000 mark. Now, as I've previously discussed, Townsville was the same price at that point in time, and now it's $400,000. Most of these suburbs are towards your $1 million mark. So I don't make the same mistake. Listen to people who actually know what they're talking about. It's as simple as that. Now, let's just go to another city that I really like, and that city's Brisbane. Now, Brisbane it's very different to probably Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney and Melbourne, you do have pockets sort of all around the city. Like, for example, you wouldn't have seen it you won't see it in all the charts, but the places that are out of the cities, like Beaumaris in Melbourne, has very good growth. So there's some great schools around. It's a beautiful area, especially towards Blackrock and the actual point of Beaumaris there. And you got very good capital growth there. Brisbane's a little bit different in the sense of almost all of Brisbane's wealth is centred around the CBD. Now, it's about 10 k's either side of the CBD, north or south. You do have smaller pockets like Fig Tree Pocket and Chandler, that kind of area that have a little bit of wealth, but it's almost entirely centred around the CBD in Brisbane. And you'll see that in the actual growth in these suburbs. Now, look, Brisbane as well has had some really strong population growth, particularly among wealthy southerners. Now, a lot of these guys actually purchase outright in these suburbs, and I'm sure most of the Brisbane agents that are watching this would 100% be able to testify to this. And I've seen it physically even at auctions, people just signing forms and writing checks of paying for prices completely outright. But anyway, look, most of the white collar jobs in Brisbane sit around here too. So look, you got a lot of employment precincts around here. Good example of that's the CBD, Fortitude Valley's another, Cannon Hill's another, South Bank, the Wollongong district's also another one where you do have a fair few jobs. You also have some towards Milton down that way, but probably not as many. But that's basically all around your CBD, like I was saying. Now, here's your Brisbane's best performing suburbs over basically the last 25 years. Now, again, this is right down to 2018, and I like that because it shows you what's performed well without throwing a dartboard at Australia where everything's gone up by 30%. So you'll see the inner north of Brisbane and the inner east, which are my two favourite markets to buy in Brisbane. Now, if you look, for example, Bulimba's one, Camp Hill's another, Norman Park, Balmoral, Cannon Hill. Those are all in the inner east of Brisbane and all areas that have really improved in income demographics over the course of time. So look, good example of that is Grange and Camp Hill have basically $3,000 a week net family household income. So that's basically on par with somewhere like the North Shore of Sydney. So, with prices of, $1 million at the time, that's just incredible. And that's why they've grown so much in value. Other areas, such as Hamilton, that's a good example. New Farm's another one. Hendra, Wilston, Windsor, those are really good examples of other suburbs. That's your inner north of Brisbane. Now, that's kind of a lot of those suburbs, especially Hamilton and Hendra, kind of your old money suburbs. So for people that don't know Brisbane, I'd compare it to somewhere like probably, lower North Shore, like your sort of Mossman, Cremorne, and for people in Melbourne, kind of like your inner east. So probably similar like your Hawthorns, your Camberwells, Surrey Hills, Canterbury, those sorts of areas. And yeah, they performed exceptionally well. Again, the reason being is because most of these suburbs have above 2,000 a week median weekly family household incomes, and the eventuation is quality before quantity, and it's just a flight to quality in these areas. So that's the reason. Another suburb I will point out, and it's not in those two areas, but look, you can probably argue it's a little bit of a part of it is probably Ashgrove. Ashgrove has very high median income, beautiful large blocks, only about 5 or so km from CBD. Home to some very good schools, and it's a lovely, just green area. So that's definitely another area to look at for Brisbane. I probably want to go to some of the smaller suburbs, or not suburbs, sorry, but cities in Australia. And the first one I want to probably go to is sort of the Hunter region. So that's Newcastle. And the reason for that is you've actually got exceptional capital growth in this area. So your top 20 suburbs and you've actually performed at 8% or more. Now, if you look here, that's actually there's actually a few more, and this is only rounding out to the top 20, but there's about 25 suburbs that performed at about 8% or more, which is exceptional. Now, it looks higher than Brisbane, but the reason being for that, Brisbane performs very similar to it is just simply because, now I'll show you the Brisbane graph, it's just simply because if you look here, all that really has happened here is at the time, Newcastle had actually performed very well and Brisbane had gone through a low slow period. So that's just why it shows up like this. Now, let's go a little bit further into it. Now, if you look at all the Newcastle suburbs here, you'll see that there's an eventuation towards particular areas. Now, Merewether, Carrington, Tyers Hill, Maryville, Islington, Mayfield East, and Cooks Hill are all there. Now, if you look at a map of Newcastle, they're all in the same area. So they're all sort of in your, I would call it your sort of beaches suburbs and sort of your inner west by the harbour side suburbs. Now, the reason being, again, is because your beachside suburbs are historically old money suburbs, and your inner west, especially harbour side suburbs, were previously very dirty kind of, miners' cottages. A lot of your wharfies used to work there years and years ago, especially in the 90s and before that. But now you've got a lot of your professionals that work there. So you've got suburbs like, for example, Tyers Hill that have a median family weekly household income of above $2,000 a week. So that's comparable to some inner west suburbs of Sydney, which is just insane. So that's why it's had so much growth, and it will continue into the future. Now, for those that haven't actually been to Newcastle in recent years, what I would say is just take a walk down Honeysuckle, the Wickham Foreshore, take a walk along the Carrington harbour side and the Maryville harbour side, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There's just, high rises going up everywhere. There's beautiful blocks being maintained. There's not only maintained, but actually redeveloped in all the circumstances. You're getting people that have bought old places for $600,000 and stuff like that a couple of years ago that are now redeveloping a house and selling for $2 million. So it's just incredible what's going on there. But yeah, if you're looking in Newcastle, this is probably your area to look. Again, prices now, I'd say in a lot of these suburbs since COVID are probably anywhere from about that sort of $750,000 mark right up to $2 million. So if you don't have that budget, I would probably look elsewhere because you're just going to subpar suburbs. So anyway, that's my summary of your sort of Newcastle market. Let's now go to another market in New South Wales, which I do really like, and that's Illawarra. And it doesn't particularly mean Illawarra. It's actually Newcastle. Not sorry, Newcastle. Sorry. I'll start again. It's actually the market I like here is actually the Illawarra, and by that I particularly mean Wollongong. Now, what I mean by that is it's certain suburbs in Wollongong have performed very well. Now, look, there's a general concentration of the Wollongong suburbs if you look here, and it probably goes back to the supply and demand again. Now, for those who aren't from Wollongong, basically Wollongong is, especially north of Wollongong, there's a thing called the escarpment. So it's basically like a really high hill basically at the back of Wollongong that basically not borders, but it basically overshadows all Wollongong. Now you can't build on it just simply because it's so steep. So all the land there has already been built and there's no more land to be subdivided. So there's just no more supply. Now, if you look at the suburbs that have performed best here, you'll see all the Wollongong suburbs: Coaldale, Tarrawanna, Thirroul, Bulli, Stanwell Park, and Austin Mere. Now, they're all northern Wollongong suburbs, and they also all have the best long-term fundamentals in terms of very high wealth and demographics there, very low supply, a lot of professional jobs coming in those areas too. And not only that as well, but you've also got, I'd argue, some of the best school districts in that area. So a good example of that is close to Fairy Meadows, a good suburb. So Fairy Meadows got, the university nearby, some very good public schools, some very good high schools. And it's not far from Illawarra Grammar School either. So that's a reason why, a place like Fairy Meadow or a neighbouring suburb like Tarrawanna has done very well. Thirroul's another one. Thirroul now has, I think I read in the Illawarra Mercury when I went to Wollongong Uni about 6 or 7 years ago. I actually read that there's now 29 or something coffee shops, where might even be more now, in Thirroul. So great town centre. There's actually some fairly good white collar industry actually there in the town centre too, particularly off Lawrence Hargrave Drive there. So that's another area to look around. And you can see in here, Austin Mere is a neighbouring suburb of Thirroul. So that's another one. Bulli is also a neighbouring suburb of Thirroul. So there's your eventuation with the best suburbs. To give everyone an idea, you probably need to get into Wollongong's best suburbs now, probably somewhere around that, I'd say $950,000 mark, right up to about $2 million. So if you don't have that budget, do not buy in Wollongong because you're buying a subpar asset. Anyway, on to the next. Finally, look, an area I do really like as well, and it's probably your cheapest market actually in the country, is your Barwon region. So your Barwon regions, now I don't necessarily mean your Surf Coast, your Queenscliff, so that's more like, your Lawns, your, Aireys Inlet, those sorts of areas, your Torquays. I mean more your Geelong area. Now, if you look here, now, this again, you'll notice there's not as many suburbs. You can see it's mostly centered around the Geelong CBD. Now, the issue here is that some of these suburbs, now they might only look to grow at 7% or even 6.5%, but there's actually like areas of those suburbs that have performed greater. Now, if you're saying a suburb has, average growth of 6.5%, you're naturally going to have pockets of the suburb that perform at 8% and some pockets that then perform at 5%. Now, you want to be buying pockets that perform at 8%. There's actually suburbs still in Geelong that you can buy for around close to $450,000 to $500,000 if you're lucky enough. So really good for someone with a little bit of a lower budget, especially longer term. Now, anyway, let's get on to it. So if you look around here, especially around the Geelong CBD, if you just look at how much houses have grown, that's just incredible. You can see East Geelong, Manifold Heights, Newtown, Geelong, Geelong West. Now, it's all around the CBD, and if you look in towards Geelong, the reason for that, again, is simply because you've got all the wealth basically stored in these suburbs. So basically these suburbs are also the oldest. They're all built out. There's no more land to build. The best schools are all there and all the best infrastructures. And now if you go around, especially the Geelong foreshore, it's beautiful. You'd almost think you'd be somewhere like maybe even comparable to somewhere like probably Port Melbourne, maybe Williamstown. It looks quite similar. It's quite nice. You know, it's close to the surf coast, so if you're a beach lover, it's a great area to live too. So good on Geelong. And also I'd say, you know, fundamentally the industry is really improving. You've got tech firms coming in, you've got, you know, finance firms coming in, legal firms, you've got medical precinct of Geelong too. So look, that's the backbone of the whole, you know, economy there now. And you know, you've got the nearby agriculture out towards Colac and West too. So yeah, that's an area that I think if you've got a lower budget, particularly around that $500,000 mark, is somewhere I'd be looking as well. Look, let's not leave Perth out because I don't want to leave it out. It's not probably my favorite area to buy in, but you know, I do own out there. And look, the thing about Perth is that, you know, you've got to be really careful about where you're buying in. Now, reason being is because Perth isn't a mining town at all. Now, I'm not insinuating that it is, but a large percentage of the actual GDP and the actual wealth coming into Perth is dependent on mining. Now, it is quite a volatile industry. So Perth does perform well over the long term, but it's very particular pockets that I would recommend buying, just simply because like areas of Perth, you know, look, they're really like good in performance, but then you've got others that are also very bad, and they also hold very high vacancy rates. Now, if you look towards here, you'll see a particular council region, and I'll give this away just for the sake of it. And one of them is a council region called Joondalup. Now, Joondalup, you can see a couple of suburbs. So an example is Hillary's, Connolly's another one. You've got Ocean Reef too, Joondalup itself, Kinross as well, and a few more actually in there. If you want to go right down to 8%, you'd have even more there too from Joondalup. Now, for those who aren't from Perth or have never bought in Perth or been there, the easiest way I can probably describe Joondalup to people that aren't basically locals or know the area well is Joondalup is basically the Parramatta of Perth. That's the easiest way to describe it. Now, the reason being is because people that live in the sort of northern coastal region of Perth, they don't consider going into town as going into the CBD. They mean into Joondalup. Now, Joondalup actually has a lot of your white collar jobs. The CBD does too, don't get me wrong. It's got white collar jobs, and it's also got, you know, fundamentally strong government industry backdrop. So a lot of the government admin jobs are actually in Joondalup. You've also got a few law firms. You've also got a few finance firms, larger real estate agencies as well that are there. So basically, look, you've got a few industries that are quite, you know, I'd say strong there. And not only that too, but it's also just the fact that when things go wrong in Perth, you do have long periods of, you know, I'd say limited price growth. Not only that too, but if you've got limited price growth in Perth, you probably want an area where you've got tenants in there for quite a long term. And even if you're an owner-occupier or it's just your retirement home, you want to be in a suburb really where, you know, there's just stuff going on and there's, you know, services nearby and all that kind of thing. So, you know, what you'll see is that in times when the market goes down, you'll have suburbs in Perth that genuinely average 8 to 10% vacancy rates, sometimes even more. Joondalup will probably only average, and Perth is a more volatile market, somewhere around that 4% mark, which in retrospect is, in my view, still a little bit high. But for Perth, if you're buying at a very good time, that is quite good. And especially on and into the future as this market continually is undersupplied, just simply because people have to live where their jobs are. And it's very simple. You've got easy access to the city and some of the nicest beaches. So, you know, Joondalup's only probably about a 10 to 15-minute drive from Ocean Reef, the beach down there. And if you like surfing or you like sort of other areas like the inner city and the walkable areas, so, you know, Tree Beach is probably only, I'd say, about 20 or so, maybe 25 minutes away to CBD, and Cottesloe are probably half an hour to 35 minutes or so away. So it's a pretty nice area. You're probably looking at a minimum price for that kind of area now, let's say somewhere about the $750,000 to $1.1 million price mark. Look, funny enough, in Perth as well, as I record this video, a lot of your cheaper suburbs in Perth have performed, very well. I mean, above 50%. And some of your areas in Joondalup have only actually done around, I'd say 20 to about 40%. However, what's going to happen, I think, in the market is you'll find that the more fundamentally strong suburbs in terms of demographics will close out the actual Perth cycle significantly stronger. So it's an area, lucky to everyone who's watching this video, that I would very strongly recommend people buy if Perth is on your cards. Anyway, look, to finalize this video, what I want to do here is I simply just want to show people that, look, if there is a strong eventuation, or not eventuation, but performance towards Sydney and Melbourne areas, and they are the top performing suburbs in the market. Now, this report here is actually different to what I was showing everyone before, but it is the stats all come from CoreLogic, which is basically the best provider of, say, property data in Australia. And you'll see the best, these are SA3 areas, so these are council regions in Australia. So you can see Yarra, Melbourne City, Boroondara, and Maribyrnong, all there, all areas that I was basically spitting out suburbs earlier. You can see the eastern suburbs there, 2 in Sydney. You can also see Marrickville, Sydney and Petersham, that's the inner west. Eastern suburbs and north, that's sort of your lower north shore and upper eastern suburbs, all there, all really good areas to buy too. You can see your inner east and inner Brisbane. So again, really good, fundamentally strong areas in terms of demographics. So look, I highly recommend those areas to buy. Really good, and this is just going to continue on into the future. Now, unfortunately, again, like I said, the price to entry is quite expensive in these suburbs. So if you do have a budget of under $1 million, I would probably recommend looking places like Newcastle, Geelong, even some parts of the Central Coast are good as well, but very few suburbs. The Central Coast is actually considered a part of Sydney in both of these reports in terms of the city. So that's right up to sort of your Doyleson sort of boundary line if you draw a line out to the Tasman Sea there. And parts of the Blue Mountains also are considered in that. So there is actual suburbs in Sydney that have done very well. You'll notice in the Aussie Home Loans 25-year report, Glenning Valley is actually in there, and that's actually in the Central Coast, just inland from kind of your Terrigal. It's kind of in between your Terrigal and sort of Wyong Tuggerah area. So that's an area to consider. Another area is Geelong and also some parts of Perth. But in Perth, just be very careful because different parts of the market perform very differently, and some areas are just so volatile it's not even funny. Look, finally, reasons why Sydney and Melbourne perform so well, very simple. This is the ASX 50, and if you look at the headquarters of companies, look how dominated Sydney and Melbourne are. They dominate more than 50% of this entire list. So if you've got headquarters of the company and they're on the ASX 50, I'm telling you right now, they probably employ more than 2,000 people, maybe even more, or maybe something around that. And it means there's a lot of jobs, especially high income, white collar jobs, especially in management, director level jobs. So that does help basically your income demographics there. You'll see some Perth areas too, mostly you'll see that it's energy based, mining materials, one or two in Brisbane, not too bad. But yeah, that's generally what you'll see there. So that also underpins our market. But anyway, that's basically your top performing suburbs. And as to what. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to this channel, and if you're looking to purchase a property in Australia's best performing suburbs, be sure to reach out via www.compoundinvest.com.au. The details are below. Thanks again, and welcome to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.